What really went down behind closed doors at the most elite Oscar after party of the year? And why are some of the biggest names in Hollywood suddenly acting like nothing happened? Because according to multiple whispers coming out of that night, Justin Bieber didn't just argue with Usher. He allegedly humiliated him in a room full of A-listers. Yeah, that room. The kind where Beyoncé and Jay-Z are hosting, where every move is calculated, every word is controlled, and nothing is supposed to go off script. So what made Justin snap? Was this just a heated moment? Or something that's been building for years behind the scenes? Because here's where it gets even crazier. 50 Cent has now stepped in, and instead of calming things down, he's hinting that what people saw that night was only the surface of a much deeper issue, and if what insiders are suggesting is even partially true, then this wasn't just an argument. This was a moment years in the making, a breaking point, and maybe, just maybe, the night everything finally started to unravel, the moment didn't look dramatic at first. In fact, if you had walked into that Oscar after party just minutes before everything unfolded, you would have thought it was just another perfectly controlled Hollywood night. The kind where every smile is rehearsed, every conversation is calculated, and every celebrity knows exactly how far they can go without crossing a line. But then something shifted. Something subtle at first, almost unnoticeable, and then suddenly impossible to ignore. People who were inside that room say the energy changed the second Usher walked directly toward Justin Bieber. Not casually. Not like two old friends catching up. This was different. This was focused, intentional, and from what multiple sources are claiming, already heated before a single word was even exchanged. Now think about that for a second. This isn't just any random interaction. This is Usher, the same man who helped introduce Justin to the industry. The same mentor figure people have associated with his rise from a teenage internet sensation to a global superstar. And yet, in that moment, insiders say there was no warmth, no respect. No sign of that old dynamic people assumed still existed. What happened next depends on who you ask, but almost every version of the story agrees on one thing. The conversation escalated fast. Some say it started with a simple question that didn't land well. Others claim Usher approached him already upset, possibly about the distance Justin has created over the past year. And then there are those who insist this wasn't spontaneous at all. That whatever was said had been building for a long time, quietly, behind the scenes, waiting for the wrong moment to explode. And this was definitely the wrong moment, because this wasn't just any party. This was one of those ultra-exclusive gatherings hosted by Beyoncé and Jay-Z, where the guest list reads like a headline lineup. We're talking actors, musicians, executives, people who don't just follow the culture, they control it. And in a space like that, the one unspoken rule is simple. You keep it together, but according to witnesses, that rule didn't last very long. Voices were raised. Not shouting at first, but loud enough that people nearby started noticing. Conversation slowed. Heads turned. And suddenly, what should have been a private exchange became something a lot more public than either of them probably intended. Now, here's where things get interesting. While some reports tried to push the idea that this turned physical, others quickly stepped in to shut that down. No confirmed fight. No punches thrown. But what they didn't deny, the intensity, the tension, the fact that whatever was said hit hard enough to completely change the atmosphere of the room, and then came the moment that people can't stop talking about. Justin didn't back down. He didn't try to smooth things over. He didn't laugh it off or play it cool the way celebrities usually do when things get uncomfortable in public. Instead, according to multiple accounts, he stood his ground in a way that caught people off guard. Some witnesses claim his response was sharp, direct, almost dismissive. The kind of tone that doesn't just end a conversation, it sends a message. And if those accounts are even partially accurate, then what happened next starts to make a lot more sense, because instead of fixing the situation or saving face, Justin reportedly did something that made the entire interaction feel even more serious. He left no explanation. No follow-up. No attempt to circle back later and clean things up. He grabbed Hailey Bieber, and they walked out, just like that. Now, if you followed celebrity culture for even a minute, you know how unusual that is. These events are built on image, on perception. Walking out like that doesn't just end a conversation, it creates a narrative. And in this case, it created a lot of questions. Was he avoiding escalation? Or was he making a statement? Because the more people started talking about it, the more one detail kept coming up again and again. This wasn't just about that night. This was about everything that led up to it over the past year. Justin has been slowly but noticeably distancing himself from people tied to his early career. And we're not talking about random industry connections. We're talking about key figures, the kind of names that were once considered essential to his success. One of those names, Scooter Braun. Another, Usher himself. Now on the surface, that might not seem like a big deal. Artists change teams all the time. They grow, they evolve, they move on. But insiders say this situation felt different, more abrupt, more intentional. Almost like Justin wasn't just moving forward. He was actively cutting ties with his past, and that's where things start to get complicated, because from Usher's perspective, if we're being real, there's a history there that can't just be ignored. He was there at the beginning. He played a role in opening doors and shaping opportunities, in helping Justin navigate an industry that can be overwhelming even for adults, let alone a teenager. So, when someone suddenly creates distance like that, especially without public explanation, it doesn't just disappear quietly. It lingers. It raises questions. And sometimes it leads to moments like the one that reportedly happened at that party. But here's the part that really takes this story to another level. Because just when people were still trying to figure out what actually happened between Justin and Usher, another voice entered the conversation. And not just any voice. 50 Cent. Now, if you know anything about him, you know he doesn't jump into situations quietly. He doesn't do neutral. And he definitely doesn't hold back when he thinks there's something bigger going on behind the scenes. So, when he started reacting to the situation, people paid attention, not because he confirmed anything directly, but because of how he framed it. The tone, the implications, the way he suggested that what people saw that night might not have been random at all. And that's when the narrative shifted, because now it wasn't just about an argument at a party. It became about history. About unresolved tension, about the possibility that whatever happened in that room was just the visible part of something much deeper. Something that had been building quietly for years without ever fully coming into the spotlight. And once that idea took hold, people started looking at everything differently. Old interviews, past relationships, decisions that didn't make sense at the time but suddenly felt a little more significant when viewed through this new lens. Because if this really was a breaking point, then the question isn't just what was said that night. The real question is what happened before it ever got to that point. And why now? Why, at one of the most public, most controlled environments in Hollywood, did something like this finally surface? Because moments like this don't come out of nowhere. They build, they stack, they wait, and then when the timing is just right or maybe completely wrong, they come out in a way that no one can ignore. And according to the people who were there, once it started, there was no way to pretend it didn't happen, even if no one is officially talking about it, even if no one is confirming the details on record. The silence itself is saying something, and it's making people wonder if this story is just getting started. And that's exactly where things start to get even more complicated. Because once people began looking past just that one night, a pattern started to form. Not a clear one, not something you can point to and say this is exactly what happened. But enough small details, enough shifts in behavior, enough quiet decisions that suddenly don't feel so random anymore. Because here's what people are now connecting. That moment between Justin Bieber and Usher didn't come out of nowhere. It didn't just appear in that room for no reason. According to multiple insider whispers, there has been tension building for a long time. And most of it has been happening behind closed doors where the public couldn't see it. And if you go back far enough, you start to realize just how deep that history really goes, because long before the fame, long before the headlines, there was a very young Justin being introduced to an industry that moves fast, thinks faster, and doesn't always stop to consider who gets caught in the middle of it. And standing right there at the beginning of that journey was Usher, the person many credit for helping open that first major door. But here's where the tone starts to shift, because while that mentorship has always been framed as a success story, some people are now questioning what it actually looked like behind the scenes. Not with confirmed accusations, not with anything officially proven, but with enough speculation and resurfaced commentary that it's forcing people to take a second look. And one name that keeps quietly coming back into the conversation is L.A. Reid. Now, in the early days, he played a major role in signing Justin and helping shape his career. That part is well documented. But what's been getting attention again recently are certain descriptions and comments from that time that, in today's context, are being viewed very differently than they were back then. Some of those remarks, especially the way Justin was described at such a young age, have left people uncomfortable. Not because they prove anything on their own, but because they add to a growing sense that the environment around him may not have been as simple or as clean as it was presented. And when you combine that with what we already know about how intense the industry can be, especially for young artists, it starts to paint a more complicated picture, because Justin wasn't just another new artist. He was a teenager navigating global fame almost overnight, surrounded by powerful figures who had been in the business long before he ever stepped into it. And in situations like that, control becomes a major factor. Who makes the decisions? Who controls the schedule? Who decides what's best? And more importantly, who benefits the most? These aren't new questions, but they're being asked again with a lot more intensity now, especially after everything that's been happening over the past year. Because when Justin started distancing himself from people like Scooter Braun, it didn't come with a press conference. It didn't come with a detailed explanation. It was quiet, subtle, but impossible to ignore. Unfollows, separation from long-time business ties, a noticeable shift in how he engages with the industry overall. And according to sources close to the situation, those moves weren't random. Some insiders claim there were internal disagreements, particularly around finances and long-term control. Others suggest it had more to do with personal boundaries and wanting to step away from an environment that no longer felt aligned with who he is now. But here's the thing, none of that has been fully confirmed. And that uncertainty is exactly what's fueling all the speculation, because when people don't have clear answers, they start filling in the gaps themselves. And in this case, those gaps are being filled with everything from industry pressure narratives to much darker theories that, at this point, remain unproven. Still, the timing of everything is what keeps raising eyebrows, because while Justin was quietly creating distance, the industry itself was going through a moment of exposure. Conversations about power dynamics, control, and what really happens behind the scenes were starting to become more public. And once those conversations begin, people naturally start looking at past situations through a different lens that includes relationships that were once seen as purely positive, that includes mentorships that were once celebrated without question. And that includes moments like the one at that Oscar after party, which now feels less like an isolated incident and more like a visible crack in something that's been under pressure for a long time. Now add another layer to that, because while all of this was unfolding, 50 Cent decided to speak up in his own way. Not with a direct statement laying everything out clearly, but with comments and reactions that hinted at a bigger story. And if there's one thing he's known for, it's saying just enough to get people thinking without ever fully spelling it out. That's exactly what happened here. Instead of focusing only on the argument, he pointed toward the idea that situations like this don't happen in isolation, that there are often deeper issues underneath the surface, things that don't make headlines until a moment like this forces them into the spotlight. And suddenly, people weren't just asking what happened at the party, they were asking why it happened, why now? Why in that setting? Why between those two specifically? Because let's be honest, if this was just a simple disagreement, it probably wouldn't have turned into such a major talking point. It would have been brushed off, forgotten, replaced by the next headline within hours, but that didn't happen. Instead, the story kept growing, more speculation, more theories, more attempts to connect the dots between Justin's recent behavior and his past relationships. And every time a new detail surfaced, it seemed to lead back to the same core idea that something behind the scenes has changed, that the dynamic between Justin and the people who helped shape his career is no longer what it used to be, and that whatever was said during that conversation wasn't just about the present. It was about the past, because people who were close enough to observe the interaction say there was a level of emotion there that didn't feel casual. It didn't feel like two people disagreeing over something small. It felt personal. And when things get personal in a setting like that, especially with that kind of history involved, it usually means there's more to the story than what anyone is willing to say out loud. So now the question becomes, what exactly changed? Was it a single moment that shifted everything? Or was it a slow buildup of experiences, decisions, and realizations that eventually led to that breaking point? Because if you follow the timeline closely, it doesn't look like a sudden explosion. It looks like a gradual separation that finally reached a point where it couldn't stay hidden anymore. And if that's the case, then what happened at that party might not have been the beginning of the story. It might have been the moment it finally became visible, which means whatever comes next could reveal even more. And if the reactions so far are any indication, people are already watching closely, waiting to see if anyone involved decides to say something that changes everything. Because in situations like this, silence doesn't end the story. It builds it. And that silence is exactly what has people paying even closer attention now. Because when no one steps in to clearly shut something down, it creates space for the story to grow on its own. And in this case, it hasn't just grown, it's taken on a life of its own, pulling in more names, more past moments, and more questions that don't have clean answers. Because once the focus shifted beyond just that party, the conversation started expanding into something much bigger than a single confrontation. It became about the system itself, the environment that young artists are introduced into, the kind of pressure they face, and the kind of relationships that shape their careers long before they fully understand what's happening around them. And at the center of that conversation, once again, is Justin Bieber, not just as a pop star, but as someone who entered the industry at an age where most people are still figuring out who they are, let alone navigating global fame. And when you look at it from that perspective, some of his recent decisions start to look less random and more like a long overdue shift, because distancing yourself from powerful figures isn't easy. Walking away from relationships that help build your career isn't something most people do without a reason. And doing it quietly, without public explanations, without dramatic statements, suggests that whatever those reasons are, they might be more complicated than what can be said openly. Now add another layer to this, because while all of this speculation has been building, the industry itself has been going through a period where past behavior is being re-examined more critically than ever before. Conversations about control, influence, and what really happens behind closed doors are no longer being dismissed as quickly as they used to be, and that shift matters because it changes how people interpret situations like this. What might have once been brushed off as a simple disagreement is now being looked at as a potential symptom of something deeper, something tied to how the industry operates, especially when it comes to young talent being managed, guided, and sometimes controlled by people with significantly more power and experience. That doesn't automatically mean something wrong happened, but it does mean people are asking more questions. And those questions are getting louder. Now, when 50 Cent stepped into the conversation, he didn't provide answers. He didn't lay out a timeline or confirm specific claims. What he did instead was something arguably more impactful. He added fuel. Through comments reactions, and subtle hints, he reinforced the idea that situations like this don't exist in isolation. That behind the polished image of the industry, there are layers that the public doesn't always see. And when someone with his reputation for speaking bluntly starts implying that there's more beneath the surface, people listen. Not because he's always right, but because he's rarely quiet, and suddenly, what started as a moment at a party turned into a wider discussion about how things work behind the scenes, about who really has control, about how much of what the public sees is genuine, and how much of it is carefully managed. At the same time, attention has also turned toward other figures connected to Justin's past, including Scooter Braun, whose role in shaping the careers of multiple major artists has already been the subject of public debate in recent years. From high-profile disputes to questions about ownership and control, his name has been part of conversations that go far beyond just one artist. And while none of those situations directly explain what happened at that Oscar after party, they add context. They show a pattern where relationships between artists and the people managing them can become complicated, especially as those artists grow older, gain more independence, and start questioning decisions that were once made on their behalf. And when that happens, it doesn't always lead to clean, easy separations. Sometimes it leads to tension. Sometimes it leads to silence. And sometimes it leads to moments like the one that everyone is still talking about. Because here's what makes this situation different. No one involved has come forward with a clear, detailed explanation. No official statement that breaks down what was said, what caused it, or what it means moving forward. And while that might seem like a way to keep things under control, it often has the opposite effect. It creates curiosity. It invites speculation. It keeps the story alive. And the longer it stays alive without clear answers, the more people start connecting dots, whether those connections are accurate or not. Now, some observers believe that what happened was simply a clash of perspectives. That Justin, now older and more in control of his life, may see his past relationships differently than the people who were part of them. That what once felt like guidance might now feel like control, and that shift in perception could naturally lead to tension. Others think it's more personal, that there are specific events, specific moments, specific conversations that haven't been made public but continue to influence how these individuals interact with each other. And if that's true, then what happened at that party might have been less about the setting and more about timing. The wrong conversation at the wrong moment, or maybe the right moment for something that had been waiting to surface. Because one thing almost everyone agrees on is this: the reaction wasn't casual. It wasn't small. It was noticeable enough that people are still talking about it, still analyzing it, still trying to understand what it means. And in an industry where image is everything, where even the smallest interactions are carefully managed, that kind of visibility doesn't happen by accident, which brings everything back to the same central question: what does this actually mean moving forward? Because if this was just a one-time incident, then eventually it will fade. Another story will take its place. Another headline will pull attention somewhere else. But if this was a sign of something bigger, something that reflects deeper changes in how Justin sees his past, his relationships, and his place in the industry, then this moment could end up being more important than it seems right now. It could be the beginning of a larger shift, a shift that doesn't happen all at once, but reveals itself piece by piece through decisions, through actions, through moments that at first seem isolated but later connect into a much bigger picture. And that's exactly why people are still watching, still waiting, still trying to figure out whether what happened that night was just another piece of celebrity drama, or the first visible sign of something that's been building quietly for years. Because if there's one thing history has shown, it's that moments like this rarely exist on their own. They're part of a story that, in this case, might not be finished yet. And now the question isn't just what happened that night, it's what happens next. Because if this really was just a random moment, then why is no one fully addressing it? Why are the details so unclear? And why does it feel like there's something just beneath the surface that nobody is ready to say out loud? And more importantly, was this actually a moment of disrespect, or was it something deeper that's been building for years finally spilling into the open? I want to know what you think. Did Justin Bieber really cross a line with Usher that night, or is this being blown way out of proportion? And what about 50 Cent stepping into the conversation? Is he exposing something real, or just adding more fuel to the fire? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because this story is far from over. And every new reaction is adding another layer to it, if you want more deep dives like this. Breaking down what's really happening behind the scenes, make sure you like this video. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because the next update on this situation might change everything.